I've got several pieces from various books to share with you today, and as is my wont, I'm sharing the book itself. This is a lovely meditation manual with or without candlelight. It's edited by Victoria Safford. And this piece, called Belonging, is by Karen Herring. I'm going to read it twice. So much of our yearning begins under an open sky. A young girl sits in the fields of her own longing. She is one more thin blade of grass connecting earth and sky, swaying with desire. To be of use, the wind whispers in her ear. You who have done this know the breeze moving through those fields can blow for a very long time. Now, years later, ripened by life and love and loss, she grows toward what calls her. She leans into her longing as a plant tilts toward the light that beckons it skyward, the light that gives strength, bestows beauty, unfurls the plant's leaves like green banners waving. What would the world be like if we all turned our faces toward the light this way? If we let ourselves belong to our longings, opened our ears to the voice that says, you, I want you, I need you. Like this, the sun charms the shoot up from the soil and coaxes the bud to release its tight fist. Like this, the wind lifts the seed from the open bloom, and the soil calls the seed home again. Time rounds the bend, older, wiser now, she replies, a green, supple blade bowing over and over again, offering her tasseled seeds to the wind, belonging to those same swaying fields that years ago called out to the young girl, yearning under the open sky. My theme today, called Home Again, comes from this poem, and I'm going to read it again because I think it's rich and there's a lot there, and I hope we can tease out some of it. So much of our yearning begins under an open sky. A young girl sits in the fields of her own longing. She is one more thin blade of grass connecting earth and sky, swaying with desire. To be of use, the wind whispers in her ear. You who have done this know the breeze moving through these fields can blow for a very long time. Now, years later, ripened by life and love and loss, she grows toward what calls her. She leans into her longing as a plant tilts toward the light that beckons it skyward, the light that gives strength, bestows beauty, unfurls the plant's leaves like green banners waving. What would the world be like if we all turned our faces toward the light this way? If we let ourselves belong to our longings, opened our ears to the voice that says, you, I want you, I need you. Like this, the sun charms the shoot up from the soil and coaxes the bud to release its tight fist. Like this, the wind lifts the seed from the open bloom and the soil calls the seed home again. Time rounds the bend, older, wiser now, she replies, a green, supple blade bowing over and over again, offering her tasseled seeds to the wind, belonging to those same swaying fields that years ago called out to the young girl yearning under the open sky. I am thinking very much these days about belonging. what it means to belong to this earth, to this planet, to each other, to forces beyond ourselves, to nature, to science, to spirituality, all of the ways that, to ourselves, all of the ways that we can belong. And so each story that I read is bringing up something to me about belonging. And so I have a few stories that I want to share with you today, and how we belong to nature and nature belongs to us. I identify as a religious naturalist, and religious naturalism is the proposition that nature is exhaustive of reality. There's not a supernatural beyond that. Nature is exhaustive of reality, and that nature itself is worthy of awe and wonder and reverence and our devotion. So how we live that out in our lives and what metaphors it takes on is the question that I'm interested in, and how we are called home and how nature prepares us for belonging. And I hope I'm going to connect that a little bit today to the labor movement. You'll see if I actually get there. So in the wonderful book, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, if you have not encountered this book, I urge you to get it on your bookshelf or listen to it on audiobook. Dr. Kimmerer reads it herself. She narrates it. And in it, she tells the story about her grandfather when he was a boy growing up hungry in Indian Territory, the prairies of Oklahoma, in 1895. On this particular day, she talks about he and his brother were unable to catch any fish that day in the creek, but they came upon a pecan grove. The word pigan, P-I-G-A-N, pigan, means any nut in indigenous language. And she talks about how in their homelands of northern Michigan, they had specific names for specific nuts, a butternut, a black walnut, a hickory. But as they were relocated, and they didn't have specific words for that specific nut, pigan became any nut, and it's the word we know now as pecan. Now listen, y'all up here in the north, we don't say pecan, and I'll shake my finger at you if you call it pecan. It's pecan. In her story, it's a year of abundance for these pecan trees, and they don't produce every year in the wild. So these boys have come upon this bumper crop of pecans. And so they pick up as many as they can, but they can't carry that many in their hands. And so they take off their jeans and they stuff the legs with as many pecans as they can carry, tying up the legs and the waist with twine. As Kimmerer writes, the nuts are the highest calorie and highest fat food they can find. It's safety for hard times. They bring home real nourishment. She says, we eat them daintily and toasted now, but back in the day, they made a porridge with them, and that was very nutritious. It's the embryo of survival, she says. So rich is the reward that the contents are protected inside a vault, double locked, a box inside a box. That's the leathery, tough outer covering, and then the shell inside. And you got to work for that good meat of the nut. She goes on in this story, The Council of Pecans, to talk about why it is that the trees don't produce every year, and how it has to do with the entire ecosystem, the squirrels and the hawks and the available nutrients and so on. And when they have enough nutrients, then they produce a bumper crop. So that's a really interesting read. And then she talks about how do they know? And perhaps the trees emit a kind of pheromone that through the air, they're able to understand each other. It's not just one tree that does that. It's a whole grove that does that. So how do they know? And she talks about the pheromones going through the air. And then she talks about the mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae is underground. The trees in the forest are often interconnected by subterranean networks of mycorrhizae, fungal strands that inhabit tree roots. The mycorrhizal symbiosis enables the fungi to forest for mineral nutrients in the soil and deliver them to the tree in exchange for carbohydrates. The mycorrhizae may form fungal bridges between individual trees so that all the trees in the forest are interconnected. These fungal networks appear to redistribute the wealth of carbohydrates from tree to tree. A kind of Robin Hood, they take from the rich and give to the poor so that all the trees arrive at the same carbon surplus at the same time. They weave a web of reciprocity, giving and taking. In this way, the trees all act as one because the fungi have connected them. Through unity, survival, all flourishing is mutual. She repeats it again later in the chapter. All flourishing is mutual. Soil, fungus, tree, squirrel, boy, all are the beneficiaries of reciprocity. I am so taken by this notion of underground networks that are communicating, that go throughout an entire grove, that share the most delicate information. And I'm really taken by what this organizing means. In Emergent Strategy, also highly recommended by Adrienne Marie Brown, she talks about this in terms of resilience. She's talking about mushrooms. So we're going underground to these fungal strands. Mushrooms detox the soil around them, not just removing the toxins, but transforming toxic content into nourishment. The very cycle of food and nourishment in nature, the food chain, works because most things on earth can be food at some point in their lives or deaths. All the creatures I think that's as far as I wanted to go with that. Everything, us included, is in this great cycle, this great recycling of energy. I find that awe-inspiring, wonderful, beyond my comprehension. Now, when I think about, I'm going to make a shift here to talk about the labor movement. These are two ways I'm going to connect my husband's life into this talk today. Here we are, Labor Day weekend. And Mike's father, Saul, was a union organizer with United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, the UE. Now, he was out in the trenches, and he was really trying to be that strand. Mike says he would not appreciate my connecting him to a mushroom. But I think being that strand that shares information, that redistributes power, that clears the toxicity of extractive capitalism and returns nourishment to the people, to the organized people, is the way that we find a metaphor in nature for the way that humans organize, and all flourishing is mutual. Nature does not hoard resources. Nature is a delicate and robust balance of all things. And as we are in the climate crisis, we see the loss of species, the loss of habitat because of the climate crisis that we're in, and it's messing up that balance. But nature, left alone, creates a robust and delicate balance. And I think that it has lessons for us about organizing, about reciprocity, about resilience, about caring for each other, about cycles of abundance and want, and that those cycles continue. I think that's why I'm so committed to awe and reverence for nature, because of what it does left alone. You may know that there are several places around the world that are demilitarized zones. The one I'm thinking of is between North and South Korea. And because no one enters the demilitarized zone, it has become a lush and verdant and lively habitat that doesn't exist outside that zone. Nature left alone is filled with abundance and reciprocity. I think the labor movement, that people who are able to organize themselves, and I'm thinking of Amazon warehouse workers, I'm thinking of Starbucks workers, I'm thinking of, we think of the unions, you know, the old people who were on the machine line. And in our service economy, it's a different kind of organizing, but it still needs to happen because capitalism needs a corrective. It needs a way to redistribute power. Capitalism, by its very nature, is a power imbalance, and it needs organized people and reciprocity to exchange that power. So I'm looking at this model of nature of how to do that. Now, I want to shift just a little bit and talk about spiritual practice. Mike, as you know, is a scientist, and he says that the work of science is to carve nature at its joints, to carve nature at its joints. Sarah, your story about your knee makes me think that if you look just at the knee when it's bent, it has a problem. But when it straightens and you begin moving and walking, the problem is not discrete to the knee, it's distributed, or you're able to find the curative effects of walking. May not cure it completely, but when the focus is not just on the bent knee, but in the whole body and movement, it's integrated again. I think the work of spirituality is taking what we understand about where nature is carved at the joints and reintegrating it. We are connected to the fungi under the ground because we are all star stuff. It exists in the same carbon-based universe, atmosphere, planet that we do. We are connected to that. I am certainly connected to pecan trees because it's my very favorite nut, and I'll eat any pecan that's near me. Nature carved at its joints allows us to see and study the individual pieces. And a practice of religious naturalism as a spiritual practice allows us to reintegrate to enter into metaphor and to understand ourselves as part of this greater whole. My understanding of religious naturalism is that all nature is connected from this tiniest quark to the outer reaches of the universe in a chain of mostly understandable laws of physics and biology and chemistry. We can take it apart, and I can see where I am in that long chain of connection. Practicing religious naturalism as a spiritual practice allows me to reintegrate those things and understand myself as truly a part of it, as a part of star stuff. Neil deGrasse Tyson says, we are part of the universe. We are in this universe. But perhaps more important than both of those facts is that the universe is in us. In my life, that's enough. I don't need there to be something beyond nature as a whole. And it does inspire awe and reverence for me. Karen Herring writes about the seed coming home again, that blade of grass that was planted and moves in the wind, and as it grows older, the tassels let the wind take the seeds away, and the soil welcomes the seed home again. Beloveds, I tell you that wherever we are, on Zoom, by the river, out on a hike, at the Edling building, where we are gathered, we are home again. This is our place with each other. And we have so much to welcome other folks into this special and spiritual place that I hope we continue to have a joyful feeling about who we are, where we are, why we are, and that we understand that all flourishing is mutual. Blessed be, and may it be so.